Here, Giri destroys Nakamura with knight f2. What about rook d3? You know, it's just exclamation mark. Because if the king would go to g1, then you can simply take the bishop, and this is a checkmate on the back rank because this rook is pinned. So instead, Nakamura took the knight on f2, but then you can just simply take the bishop. That's what Giri did. And if you take back, then there's a check and the checkmate on the back rank. And if you don't do that and defend your rook, then this rook is simply hanging and you win the game.
Excusez-moi?
This is just a great game. You know, the calculation it requires for Giri to play the next brilliant moves is just amazing. Okay, first it starts with pawn takes on g6, and now there's a knight to d2. Why is this good? It looks a bit like a quiet move, but it's not, because you're threatening a family fork here with the rook, the queen, the king.
¿Qué pasa?
So there's a lot to be taken care of by white. After queen e7, threatening some checkmates here. So you need to be very accurate as black. Well, that's of course what Giri is. It's a check, and Giri takes the rook because there's a check. So you cannot take the knight back. The king has to come up. Another check. Now the king goes back, and see, there's another discovery looming here. Check, come forward. So remember, when Giri played knight to e2, he had to see this, because this knight is covering the two checkmate squares. It's just unbelievable, I would say. Now the queen comes in. There is not even a check at the moment on this board for white. Queen comes in, takes a knight, and with this move, attacking the queen and trying to give checkmate, white resigned, because where do you go to? Let's say you go here, there's a check, and if the knight gets in between, there's a bishop here. If you cover, it's check, and checkmate over here. And if you would go here, it's a checkmate on g3.
Bit of weird play by white.
Here, he just plays knight to b3. Can you believe it? Just giving up the knight, because it can be taken. Well, if you don't take, by the way, there's a checkmate here, right? So remember that. And you cannot take with the pawn, because it's pinned. So, of course, Artemiev took the knight, but then what? You know, what's the follow-up? Well, perhaps you saw that this pawn is weak, after all. You can take, and then if the king moves here, you can take back the knight. All right, you know, that's a exchange of knights basically, but the king position is super weak now. Do you see the winning sequence? After bishop d3, queen to a8, you have to get in between. If you don't, then this is crushing as well, and not an improvement. So the bishop gets in between, and then there's a nice check on a2 because of the pin. You take, the bishop takes, and this bishop is now being attacked. If you try to defend the bishop, then you can simply give a check on c1, the king comes forward, and there's a beautiful check over here, and you have to put the queen in between, and this is over.
Formidable, formidable.
There's a lot of nice sacrifices, but I think this is just one of the most beautiful sacrifices I've ever seen. Look at this. After knight c5, what about rook d3? You know, it's just...
I'm Mr. X, and do you like this video? Make sure to subscribe.
It's defended by the pawn and the knight. Okay, the pawn is being pinned. So, but let's check out what happens if you actually take the rook. It's just in the middle of the board. It's unbelievable. So what if you take? Well, there's a long sequence of moves. You take back, rook comes forward, check. And here you play back the bishop and see how this bishop is very weak. So after this check, you can win this bishop. And this is a winning position with such a weak king. White goes to e2 with the king. But then there's a check on g3, and this knight is covered, and the king doesn't have any squares to go to anymore, because his rook is still covered, right? So you have to take the knight, and then with the check, yeah, now the king goes here, and you take the queen, and yeah, this will be a checkmate at some point.
Je ne sais quoi?
It's hard to really understand this game and to understand what's going on, because after queen f6, you know, this rook is hanging, you know what's going on? And instead of taking the rook, Giri plays bishop to c2. That's just unbelievable. So what happens if you take? Then there's a check, and yeah, what if you go here? Well, we will see actually, because this is similar to how the game ended. So white played king c1. Well, then you simply take the pawn on e2. Yeah, just let's take a pawn while your rook is hanging. If you take it like white did, Then you go forward with the king, and then you just simply try to trade off queens, but of course that's not what you want. You just give away your queen, and you move the pawn forward to b3. So that if you actually take the queen, yeah, well then it's checkmate, obviously.